So there just was so much investor money and pressure that it just moved the needle like that. And at the same time, in the public space and just the consumer space, all the conversations around climate, it's just all is bubbling around at the same time. So the combination just made it, there was way more work in our world, especially 2021, 2022, than I've ever seen in 15 years.
Hey, thanks for being here. That was Jonathan Hanwit, founding partner and CEO at thinkPARALLAX, a full-service ESG strategy and communications agency that works with brands and companies that you have surely heard of. And their name says it all. Jonathan and his team truly believe that we are more than the sum of our parts, and that a diversity of perspectives and backgrounds only makes us stronger. The company is committed to looking at things from multiple angles, like the parallax effect, to develop the most well-rounded approach for their clients. Jonathan and his co-founding partner, Guusje Bendeler, started thinkPARALLAX more than 20 years ago in their garage in San Diego, California, and since then, the agency has grown, evolved, and pivoted into a nationally recognized leader in the ESG, sustainability space. I say that because that was a big topic of our conversation, how we went from sustainability and responsibility to ESG and then back to sustainability and what comes next. This was such a fun conversation, not only because of all the insights Jonathan provides, but because this was Jonathan's second time on the show. I'll leave the link to that show in the notes. So this was a follow-up conversation to the things that we talked about back in 2018, and things have definitely changed. You might have caught wind of how quickly the sustainability space is evolving, and that's exactly what we discussed. The rise of corporate attention to the climate crisis, the role that investors have played in driving action, pending legislation, consumer sentiment, the role and value of reporting frameworks, and much more. If you're someone who's interested in the state of sustainability and ESG, what it takes to work in this space, where things are headed, you're going to want to settle in and hear Jonathan's perspective based on more than 20 years of building a company dedicated to building unique sustainability strategies, programs, and platforms for well-known companies. It's clear that Jonathan is so passionate about and totally committed to this work, and that he loves helping others get a leg up in this space. What he's seen working with companies of a variety of sizes in a variety of industries over the past, what have been a crucial 20 years, will help you navigate what it takes to have a role in corporate sustainability, or ESG, in 2023 and beyond. Tune in, there is a lot to consider. So with that, here's my conversation with Jonathan Hanwit. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Welcome to Good Things Happening, the show that explores the sustainability progress that's being made just under the surface at your favorite brand or company. I'm your host, Derek Sabori, and these are the people making it happen. Hey, Jonathan, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here, man. I'm so glad to have you.
Thank you. It's glad to be back, which I realize is hard to believe, but that's 4 years ago, 5 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, that's right. 2018, you were on the show once before. So I'll plant that seed for anybody that wants to go dive back. We did a fun little recap of just how you guys started, what your role is, how you got into this space, the evolution of thinkPARALLAX, your company. But I'm sure even then, what's funny is even then in 2018, you had said a lot's happened and a lot's evolved and a lot's changed. Even more has evolved and changed since then, right?
It's going to make for a very dramatic story, but yes.
Well,
lots changed. I think in the end, all for the better, but it's been an interesting ride, especially the last 5 years.
Well, we're going to dive into all of that. For you guys, 20 years. You guys have been in business 20 years now. Is that right?
Yeah, 20 years. Hard to believe. Yeah, we're actually going to have like a celebration where we have a team around the country. And in September, we try to meet twice a year, but we couldn't pull it off. So we're just going to meet all in September here in Encinitas. Have a big party. So, and among other things. So yes, 20 years, which is, it's again, hard to believe.
That's a big deal. And I think 20 years of being a purpose-driven company focused on sustainability, I would imagine you've seen it all. I mean, I know I've seen it change a lot. So what has really stood out? I want to dive right into that. What has stood out as the biggest changes? Let's talk about what it was like when you started, what it was like in 2018, and what it's like today, just in terms of sustainability, reporting, ESG, all of it. I mean, take it anywhere you want to go, because I know that's a big open-ended question, but what comes to mind?
It's a very open-ended question, and it's evolved a ton. And I have two good anecdotes, but I do need to remind you that we really started off as a brand agency in probably 2008. It just was only focused on purpose. And then 2014, it was just in the sustainability space. So we've done work in and around with corporate sustainability, corporate social responsibility since 2009 or 10. But when we started, we were started out of a garage in Ocean Beach, and I pretty much took what I could get. So, it wasn't like more beggars can't be choosers. But what was so interesting was that I had a panel in San Diego. They have a cause conference, and I put together a panel in I guess this was last October, so about 6 or 8 months ago. And I realized that I had spoken at the same conference 10 years ago, and I looked back and saw the deck and the information I had in my notes from my last speech. And believe it or not, that was 10 years before, so I guess that would have been about 2012, 2013-ish. There was no mention of climate.
Right. Yeah.
Which I was like, wait a minute. It was about like volunteerism. It was about diversity. It was about giving. It was like employee engagement. It was all kind of the social issues, which weren't even nearly brought as much to the surface as they are now. But there was zero mention of carbon, climate, supply chain, scope 1, 2, 3 emissions. It wasn't in the conversation. And it was in some of the reports that we put together. But I mean, honest to God, no one talked about it. It's mind-boggling now.
Really is. And what's funny, on the apparel industry side, there was this big report that came out a while back, started in 2017 as it evolved. It was called the CEO Agenda, and the Global Fashion Agenda had put it together in terms of sort of this one pager that CEOs are always asking for when it comes to sustainability, which seems impossible to do. But they put together these 7 priorities, and they address them, and hey, you need to do these first immediately and then tackle these later on. First, in 2018, it was same thing, no mention of climate. 2019, they're like, ooh, we actually need to put climate in here. So it was addressing climate. And then the next version, come 2019, 2020, it was reversing climate. So even for them, it went from 0 to that language just being turned up to all of a sudden like, oh, now we're talking about reversing. So similar thing, right? It's so surprising. Is that where all of the effort is right now? If you're not addressing climate, are you even dealing with sustainability?
I mean, I can't think of any projects. I think we have 35 different clients, there's definitely more than 35 projects. And I guess there's a couple that touch on the S, like this, the social piece of it, the part. But I don't think any of them don't in some way touch on the carbon climate issue, which 10 years isn't really that long.
Exactly.
Big picture thinking. Like, so what's it going to be in 10 years? And I think we could probably sit around for 10 hours and have an interesting discussion around like the evolution of what it looks like. Because I think about it, and our business keeps changing as it relates to what the needs are in the marketplace. And that just keeps rising to the surface.
So today, you guys, see if I get this right, you guys are helping brands with their communication strategy, helping them with their ESG reports, putting together reports, convincing them to do better marketing, better strategy. You're kind of this combination service. Is that fair to say? And give us a little sense of what kind of companies and brands are coming to you for that kind of help.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first, I should really start off by saying we really don't do any marketing. So we have really no consumer-facing kind of communications we're doing. But how we talk about it now is we break up into 3 big buckets. And the first one is really the strategy work, which has been probably the biggest evolution from what this business was even from the last time we talked until now, because we've hired really kind of like what you'd think of as like a PwC consultant and built out different offerings that are a handful of different like strategy, benchmarking, materiality assessment, get to understand the business and give them recommendations on how to actually build their strategy out and then actually build it out with them. Because in the past, we really were kind of after the fact of like reporting and communicating.
Yeah.
So we built out a whole team. So we have a department that's just focused on the strategy piece, which has been great. So when the soup and nuts idea is that we actually finally have that in place. So we can put the actual strategy in place, and then we help companies determine how they're going to collect all the data for all the different things that are part of their strategy. collect all the data, and then that obviously goes into a report, which takes on a ton of forms, which I can explain to you. So a lot of reports we're doing that are explaining what they've currently done, like in the year before. And then we do the communications work. And the communications work, it's definitely not sexy marketing. It's not the Allbirds or the turn the plastic bottles into shoes kind of a campaign. The communications work, it's for usually for investors, for employees, or for their customers. And what it is, it's maybe different types of campaigns. It could be us creating content. It could be making a website that talks about their supply chain. It's really taking all of the subject matter kind of around the actual ESG or sustainability strategy and understanding what the goals are. It might be just to get investors to better understand what they're working on, or hey, maybe it's to do a behavior change campaign for employees around a particular issue, or for customers to better understand what the company's doing around sustainability to sell more product. So it's kind of a mix of those three audiences. And what we create, I mean, to someone that isn't in our world, I might say, oh, we do some marketing, but it really is just like communications around all the sustainability efforts to those three different audiences for different goals. And I mean, it'd be far and few between. There's really like a sales, kind of piece of what we're doing, but in some way it all is communicated to different audiences, which there might be the share price might go up, or there might be like an uptick in sales related to something that we've done, but we're really more focused on the strategy, the reporting, and then taking what we've put in place and then communicating to those different audiences.
Got it. Do you get a sense that, one, I want to come back and find out kind of who your main clients are and kind of what sectors specifically come to you. Are they coming to you though as well because this is something that's baked in, they find it super important, it's just become part of their brand ethos? Or are they getting pressure from stakeholders, investors, a little bit of everybody, and they're like, hey, help us out, we know we have to do this? What's the mix there?
I wish it was part of their ethos. And I think that they're learning that, as we both know, that millennials want to work for a purpose-driven company, and that consumers want to buy purpose-driven brands. We've been doing that forever. But I think largely it's the pressure that they're put under. And that's from investors, which I can explain a lot more about, and then employees, and then some of their consumers. And again, if we go back 10 years, it's like just night and day for the pressure. So they're more being forced to, which sounds kind of harsh, but I think that largely, companies just default to profit over purpose. And so that's just the nature of the game. So what's happened, so who we're working with is, we're typically working with Fortune 500 companies. For example, Neiman Marcus, Ralph Lauren in your world, Snapchat, Merck, Eli Lilly, Campbell's, kind of runs the whole gamut of various industries. So there's probably 15 different industries, but we're really working on the same types of projects. So we take our learnings, what we're doing, and then we can use that for different industries. So it's been across the board. And then we probably have 5 clients that you maybe haven't heard of that might be in healthcare, or like real estate or development. And they're more earlier in their journey. And so if you take a Campbell's or like a Merck or a big, huge company, they have built out a strategy 10 or 15 years ago. They have a team put in place. They're operationalizing everything that they're doing. They're keep evolving it. They're setting new targets. And mostly what they need us for is they have a very specific need. Like, hey, can you help us produce a SASB report? Sure. We can tell you what needs to be in the report. We can do a disclosure workshop to really make sure we're not missing anything. We can produce it for you, or we can do a campaign. Kind of runs the gamut. But what I've been realizing, especially the last couple of years, is that we have a handful of clients that are more early journey. And it might be an 80-year-old company. Like, we work with a handful of paper companies. And they're old, as in they've been around for a long time, but they're new in terms of like where they're at for their sustainability journey. They have like a fraction of what a strategy might be in place, but they're very eager because they realize that the life of the business is dependent on how resilient they are and how sustainable they are. I mean, if you took the paper industry, for example, if there's no trees, there's no business. So they really understand the value in sustainability simply from like a resilience standpoint. So for someone like that, they need our guidance to help really build the strategy out, to think of all the things that might be missing, what need to be included, they need the reporting, they need the comms. And they look at us a little bit more like partners because they need more help and more guidance. And it's probably a little bit more of an equal relationship than someone that has had a program built out in place, like a huge existing brand that really knows what they're doing. They just need someone to get it done. So it's been an interesting change. So I think for all these years, we pick up all these huge clients, and I could list them all out, Southwest Airlines and kind of you name it, we've worked with a ton. But in the end, I mean, they're great to work with and it goes really well. And I have no complaints, but I think the work is actually more impactful with companies that are, again, they're not necessarily small, as in, less than 500 million or $1 billion, but they're just earlier in their journey.
Because they're eager, they're hungry, they've got a lot.
They know they need to do it. And I think I could, if you want me to, I could definitely kind of try to explain how I've seen the landscape evolve over the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, let's do it.
Kind of the why.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, so I've been doing the same work for the most part, but our focus around corporate social responsibility, sustainability, reporting, communications for 10 straight years. And then a little bit before that, since 2009 or 10. So now it's 13 or 14 years. And we pushed really hard to do the work. And I think it was around 2018, 19 that the big institutional investors, which would have been after I spoke with you the last time, 19 into 20, which the institutional investors, the folks that are around the world that basically have all the money, they realized to some degree that companies that were more sustainable, and when I say sustainable, and I'm using my air quotes if you can't see it, are ones that are just going to last longer, are actually more profitable. So they're really looking at the profit. They're not like, oh, this company is like doing something better for the earth,
for the planet, better for people. Yeah.
But they're really more like, well, it's going to be around here longer. It's like you replacing your deck in your backyard. Like, well, if I buy this wood, it's going to last, it's harder wood. It's going to last 30 years and it's going to cost more money. But in the end, I'm going to need to replace these 2 other pieces of this material. So this is a better investment. So what happened was, they realized this, which is, I think nothing actually new. And then Larry Fink, have you heard of him? Do you know that is the guy?
Yeah, BlackRock.
BlackRock. Every year he puts out a letter, and for year after year after year, and now I think they kind of cut up. He was putting a lot of pressure on all of their holdings, like to, hey, go deeper on purpose, figure out everything that we're talking about. And it really started to move the needle in terms of just like, I don't have the percentages in front of me, but it's trillions of dollars that were then invested specifically for ESG, environmental, social, and governance funds. So then all of the companies, which were even a lot of our clients, maybe BlackRock owned 1%, which is a ton, they're then being scrutinized on all these different ESG issues. So from the top down, for the very first time, the CEO and the CFO were asking our clients, who were the VP or the directors of sustainability, what are you doing about our human rights? What's happening with our supply chain? And it's because they were getting asked by the institutional investors. And then along with that, there's like a proliferation of different types of organizations like ESG ratings agencies. And these ratings agencies, they're kind of like a Rotten Tomatoes for movies. Mm-hmm. They go in, they develop their own methodology, and they all have their own methodology, which in itself is questionable, but they have their own methodology. They go in and, they have, 150-point checklist that they're going to evaluate company X on. And then they notice that there's 4 or 5 things that they're not doing. And then they're like, ding, ding, ding. And then they reach out to that company, or they say, you're not performing here. And then the investors are looking to the ratings agencies. How did you rate them? Just like a Rotten Tomatoes. And then they go back to the corporations. Well, what are you doing? So that happened. And then, in terms of our business, we had in 2020, especially, and in 21, we had more inquiries for work, like double the amount of inquiries than the work that we could actually do.
Wow. And do you think it was that initial pressure, do you think, from those big investors? For sure, right?
We had, so what they're looking for is predominantly, what are you doing? They're like, what are you doing? And like, what are you doing in all these areas? So while their strategy might not be complete, a lot of these companies were so unevolved in how they were reporting or communicating it. They're like, there's all these different types of investors and consultants and ratings agencies and other people in the space that are looking at them, and they need something to share. So their first go-to is like, oh, we need a report. So I think last year, as a company, we probably produced, 15 to 20 reports. But if I had to guess, we got 60 inquiries. And It's a lot of work, to put a report together. I can explain it, but it's
because they're multi-pages. Some of them are, 100 pages,
100 pages, 50 pages. And you're identifying all those same areas that are in your strategy. You're asking people to get the data on what happened, and then you're usually calling them to understand what happened, to write kind of a narrative, like a story around it, putting it together in a document. And then these reports, there's 3 kind of internationally recognized frameworks that you can include in the back, which GRI is one, SASB one, TCFD. And you can look in the back and take the time to outline what needs to be included for each one of those indexes. And then an investor or a ratings agency could quickly go to the SASB one because they know what to look for the apparel industry, for example. So there just was so much investor money and pressure that it just moved the needle like that. And at the same time, in the public space and just the consumer space, all the conversations around climate, it's just all is bubbling around at the same time. So the combination just made it, there was way more work in our world, especially 2021, 2022, than I've ever seen in 15 years.
So I want to stop there. I want to put a pin in that for a second here, because one, for listeners that might be listening, maybe they're new to the space, ESG, I mean, you're looking at measuring, these are metrics for environmental impacts, social impacts, and how companies are governed and what they've put in place to kind of really fulfill those commitments, right? Mm-hmm. What's really interesting to me, though, is, we talked about how the climate conversation has evolved over, let's say, 10 years. It's interesting to me, too, how the ESG conversation has changed in, 3 years, mm-hmm. and how it's become this hot topic, all of a sudden. I want to touch on that, too, for a second. See, has that impacted you at all with sort of this outside criticism of people freaking out over ESG?
Well, you want to hear something really interesting?
Yeah.
So we always said we were like a sustainability strategy reporting and communications agency.
Yeah.
And and how we see it, sustainability encompasses everything, and ESG is focused really on corporations and how they're operating.
Yeah.
And so we just got so many inquiries, and there's so much confusion around how people talk about sustainability, which I know that like they don't know the language.
Exactly.
Right? All the nomenclature. So we changed our description to be an ESG strategy reporting and communications agency in 2021, sometime around then, because that's what everyone was asking for. And we were like, well, it's kind of the same thing.
But you're like, okay.
To some degree, so we changed it. And then, I think in the last, I don't want to bring up the clients, but there's been backlash with a few of our clients.
Did you change it back?
Changed it back.
Full service sustainability
strategy communications agency.
It's so
we
crazy.
still use it. We have it. We're putting on an event in Dallas next month, and we say ESG/sustainability because some people still refer to it as ESG/sustainability. And I think for us, whatever works for you works, but the backlash. Well, there's been backlash for 6 months,
and it's crazy how quickly that evolved, I think. And how, because ESG just sort of bubbled up and all of a sudden it was like, oh, we're just starting to understand this, right? Larry Fink, mm-hmm. BlackRock, and corporate governance and investors. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, right when it was starting to catch hold, it seems like then all of a sudden it was like, nope, we've got all these issues and it's a bad thing. It's a word you got to be really careful of. It's like, oh my gosh, that didn't last very long.
No. And, I think that is the thing in life of a few people speak really loudly.
Yeah.
And it happens in my personal life and like my local community. You see when people, they speak up that have a lot to say or a lot of money and a lot of power, they can move the needle even if it's not the majority. And it appears that way. It's the same thing with, there's going to be an SEC ruling. I'm sure you know about that. That's another big push and the thing that's been talked about for the last year of making mandatory climate disclosures. So the
mm-hmm.
SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, which all the publicly traded companies are, which we had thought was going to be in December or November, 6 months ago. A law, they were going to put out a requirement that these companies are going to be reporting on it, which for us, hell yeah, great, because if it becomes mandatory, both good for our business. At the same time, good if it's going to be mandatory, then they're going to need to put some strategies in place in order to document it and then report on it.
Yeah.
And if they don't have a strategy in place, well, honestly, the investor money is going to go away or it's going to shift to some degree. So they're going to be forced, basically. It's because they're going to need to show some level of transparency on what they're doing with their different scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions and a few other things. And so then, but it's been pushed. And I thought it was going to come out, maybe we heard April, and now we're here in October. Mm-hmm. And I'm not in the middle of all the politics, but I feel pretty sure that there's a handful of folks, and more than just a handful of folks, that are lobbying against it.
What do you think people are getting wrong about ESG? Well, I guess if you had a moment to shout out on a bullhorn, like guys, to clarify, here's what we mean. What do you think ESG did wrong? I mean, I know it's just this sort of ephemeral thing. It's not an agency or anything, but what went wrong with ESG to get the criticism I think that it's getting?
I mean, the criticism is just, I think it's just the divisiveness between the two parties in our country, and one's falling on one agenda and one is falling on the other. And they're saying somehow that ESG is, I guess, with our woke kind of agenda, and they're going against it maybe without even really understanding what it means.
That's what I think.
I think. And then on the flip side, I think that there's people that still don't understand that it actually means your company can be more profitable. So they're thinking like it's been proven that more women on your board actually makes your company more successful. There's there's a handful of like proven statistics. There's data behind it that just said that by making your company more sustainable, and those there are ES, the governance, and the ES and the E and the S, it's in the long run going to become more profitable. But I think people have the mentality, which still blows my mind in today's day and age, that those things aren't really essential to making a business successful, and profit comes first. There's no other way around it. Why would they not do it?
What's crazy is you saying all those things. I mean, that was the reason that I stayed in and got excited about this space, because everything I learned made perfect sense to me. I'm like, absolutely, that makes sense. And I feel like the more you're exposed to it, the more you dive in and you learn all of these things. And then the space that we're in is trying to combine business and just do business better. And ultimately, I mean, a business can't do good things if they're not profitable and alive anyway. So it's this merger of course, recognizing that we're going to make products, do business, but we can do it better and more respectfully and more responsibly for future generations. And it comes with, cost benefits in the end. So we've got a lot of explaining to do. It's a marketing problem, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you can just like really pull out the financial modeling behind it. And if you said, okay, employees that are more engaged around a company's purpose are less likely to quit, and I'm making all this up, and it's going to cost 2.5 times a person's salary to replace them at a high level, and it's 1 times a person's salary. And if the retention rate changed because of this, if you're like a 10,000 person company, then it's going to save you this amount of money. And if you build out your supply chain in this way with, like kind of labor audits and all these other kind of topical tactics in place, in the end, it's going to be more stable, and then the price is not going to fluctuate as much. I mean, I can't come up with all the examples, but it seems like if you could explain just the financial piece to the E, S, and G, to the people that are kind of the naysayers, maybe that would help them change their perspective.
Well, maybe we'll reach some ears here on the show today, Jonathan. Maybe we'll make progress on that. For you guys, I would say, so in that sense, is it today? Is it easier to do this work? Is it harder now than it was before? Is it just sort of the same? Do you feel that pressure on you guys? I mean, obviously you changed your website, but has it put kind of a stick in things? Do you
mean the ESG backlash?
I guess, yeah, I think so. With all of a sudden it's like, before I think it felt like we were running full steam ahead. And to me, it felt like everybody was on this train for the most part because it made good sense. And then, all of a sudden now there's some backlash, and all of a sudden I find myself even going, oh, geez, do I have to be careful here? Is it, or do we just, I don't know. Are things moving as quickly as they were before? I
don't think they're moving as quickly as they were before, but I mean, and the same thing for us. We had more inquiries than we knew what to do with, and then come November, December, they didn't just dry up completely, but they, compared to having like one every other day, it went down to like one a week. So it definitely slowed down. But if you really take a step back and you think about everything that's being put into place, that I think they said by 2030, every new car manufactured needed to be an EV, right?
Yeah.
Just like,
it's happening.
And in California, like I think all new homes need to have solar. Like there's so many things that are in and around related to like things becoming mandatory that if you just think in 10 years, I can again brainstorm, there's just going to be so many more, I believe, mandates around what people and corporations need to be doing around sustainability, that this is just like a little hiccup because the economy kind of slowed down and there's a little bit of a backlash. But I think in the long run, no. I mean, there's no way around it. I mean, we're not, the Earth is not cooling down.
No.
And there's not less problems, right?
No, exactly.
If you took all that, I don't even need to get in there, but there's so many issues that need solutions that I just think it's the beginning. It's just slow. Maybe it slows down until the end of the year, but I think that our space is not going anywhere. So people are bought in more than they ever were, and there is more energy, resources, and money put towards ESG or sustainability as a whole than it was. So I can see it. It's just as a whole, companies have slowed down. Microsoft said they weren't giving any raises for the next 12 months. So I think that's just not our space. That's just the economy by and large.
Yeah. Okay. So we're still moving in the right direction.
I believe so.
Yeah, let's hope so. How about for you guys? So when it comes to communication, and this, I know you guys don't, I know you described what kind of communication you're working on, but I still want to get your opinion on this. There's a lot of talk about companies greenwashing, right? Or saying things, talking about things that they don't have access to. There's a class action lawsuit recently with Nike, right? Getting called out for making kind of net zero claims and these bigger picture claims. But when it comes down to the product, the consumer's like, hey, this isn't a sustainable product or material. Do you find that, how are your clients reacting with just sort of, is there fear of saying the right thing, saying the wrong thing? There's, traceability requirements coming out of Europe. Is that landscape changing, and are companies kind of clamming up a little bit? And how do you think that affects us going forward on this journey?
Good question. And again, as I mentioned before, we're not really doing a whole lot of consumer facing stuff. So I don't really have that answer. I do know that in Europe, I think it was recently launched that they put together a criteria on what kind of a checklist for companies to make sure that they weren't greenwashing. Have you seen that?
Right. Parts of it, I think. Depends which one it is specifically. But yeah, that whole area, there's pressure on it kind of coming from at all angles.
So I see that. And then I've seen, like with us, when we go through the reporting process, we put out, 15 of these reports or so a year. It used to go through 2 rounds of review. And I mean, as in not just like design and the copy kind of revisions, but 2 rounds of review, like with our sustainability director and maybe their boss. And now it's minimum of 4.
And one of those persons is a lawyer,
6.
Right?
Yes. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It goes by, I mean, for sure it goes by legal, but it just, the level of scrutiny, I want to say, is 2 to 3 times what it was 2 years ago. It changed that quickly. People are looking at that many details. So I think in terms of the greenwashing, it's going to become far and few between, I would think, because there's so much transparency and there's so much scrutiny at this high level and the strategy level that, I mean, you're going to get caught by saying things the wrong way. And we have had inquiries over the last year or two from companies that had a product or a program that they wanted us to help them communicate that we decided not to take on because it potentially could have been greenwashing. But I think it just is going to get smaller and smaller with the amount of data that's going to be available, the transparency, and then it's the scrutiny. We see it. They're scrutinizing what we're putting out. We're putting out like almost technical reports. And so you couldn't, the marketing team, the brand team is not going to dare do a story about their awesome supply chain that goes from cotton to the cotton mill, to the t-shirt, to the person, to the recycling, if they don't consult with their ESG or their sustainability team to actually get clear on, hey, what actually is our program, for our supply chain? Do we have a good understanding? Do we have a program in place that like audits our team, our supply chain? And what does that look like? Because we know we're going to get scrutinized. And we definitely have a handful of projects, I'll say 5, where it's the brand team with the sustainability team. And those are the conversations. And it's just like where you would come up with a campaign that's like, XYZ. It's a really, clever, flashy campaign. It's like rooted in the strategy now, which I don't know how much it was in the past because we weren't doing a whole lot of work with the CMOs, but it definitely, there's this overlap now that I didn't see in the past, which is good.
Yeah, exactly. Getting more people bought into it, and it's becoming a more of a holistic approach. When it comes to strategy for you, I'm looking, on your website, you guys have it broken down where you say that you help define your impact with brands, deepen your impact, and then amplify your impact. So that's, strategy, materiality, and then moving on through it. If you could, what would you, I'm going to ask for some free advice here for our listeners, but strategy wise, is it hard? Is it hard for companies to develop a sustainability strategy for those that maybe don't have one? Or in your mind, or is it just sort of a simple like, hey guys, there are 3 things that you need to be tackling, and here's what they are? Is it as simple as that, or do we overthink it?
If it's as simple as that, they wouldn't be hiring us.
That's right.
For a smaller company, it depends on how complicated the business model is, and then the industry, and the apparel, which is your world. I think is fairly complicated relative to the paper company we're working with.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they literally have the forest right there. It goes to the mill. It's turned into paper or pulp, or corrugated. It goes to the store. The supply chain there is no supply. That's it.
Nice and easy, nice and tidy.
Versus the apparel world. I mean, you can explain it to me. How many different steps are there to get to be the shirt on my back?
Yeah, too many.
Like 5 or 10. I don't know. There's the
even more
fields. I don't even know.
You've got all your tiers. You've got your cotton, and then you've got your ginning. So you've got your processing. That you've got your spinning, and then your yarns go to knitting or weaving, and those yarns often might get treated. And then once your goods are knitted and dyed, then they're dyeing, effluent, wastewater. What chemicals went in there? What's going on with energy at that spot? And then from there to cutting. And from cutting, sewing, packaging, finishing, transportation, selling, you name it, it just keeps going.
Gosh.
And there are so many inputs along the way. And
oh my gosh.
That's all that's global. That goes from Bangladesh over to Pakistan, back over here, and then it's cut and sewn over here, and then shipped over here to be finished. And
oh
it's
my gosh.
Screen printed over there, but it's cuckoo. But
so what was your question?
I think my question was, because in my mind, I always feel like I try to simplify it in terms of, hey, if I were going to give guidance to a brand or a company, what 3 things would you say? Like, hey, no matter what, you need to do this.
Well, like I was saying, I think how you just explained, I wouldn't even know where to start.
Right.
But if it's the paper company, I mean, I think it'd be a lot easier in terms of how the business operated, what we would focus on. But if it was me and I couldn't afford to pay anyone to do it, the first thing I would do is I would do a benchmarking exercise, and then take 3 or 4 competitors, and 1 or 2 that are kind of are my aspirational competitor, and learn from their reporting or however you could possibly figure it out. What are the issues that they're focused on? To use that as a baseline to build my strategy. And then I would look at SASB, it's the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board.
Yep.
On their website, they have a section where they've actually done the due diligence to outline all the material topics for every single industry that exists. So you can go on their website. I think it's free, or used to be. You'll see it. You can filter out. These are all the different areas for apparel, for example, that you would focus on. And then out of the 30, these are maybe the top 7. So they've done the lion's share of the work to get you started. What you would then theoretically need is someone to really figure out what are actually the most important ones and what you have control over, and what's going to be impactful in the short term or what's going to be impactful in the long term. So I think you could get started off like that, and that would be your the basis, and that's how we would do it. We just do it we built our own process, our methodology around our strategy benchmark, which is that exercise. We have 36 topic points that we would review from 4 different companies to then see where all the gaps were, to then come back to you and say, well, you forgot about X, Y, and Z, X, Y, and Z, X, Y, and Z. Okay, they agree. And then we would go through and do a materiality assessment. And the materiality assessment is the same but different thing, where we actually interview all the different stakeholders. So if it was the apparel company, we would, interview the folks that work there and the leadership team, some consumers, probably some people in the supply chain, to understand what are actually all the issues. And then kind of cross-reference that with what we learned in our benchmark to actually understand for this particular business and this business model, what are the most important or material issues. That's, say, the top 10 we have to focus on. We can't get around, build our strategy, set our targets, and then work backwards or forwards on how we're going to achieve those. So yes, you could do it if you had a small business. You could just figure out 3. I wouldn't want to say what those 3 were because they're really relevant to the industry, but there's going to be something with E, there's going to be something with S, there's going to be something with G, and I don't know what those are, but that would be your basis to figure out two for each.
That's great insight. And I'm glad that you brought that up, whether it's SASB or using existing lists that are there. You guys are a B Corp, certified B Corp, right?
Yeah, we're a B Corp as well, yeah.
That right there, I always tell people like, hey, your roadmap is right over there in the B Corp assessment, and you can download that for free and do your assessment right there. If you want a roadmap, it's going to tell you all the things that you should do. And you're not going to be able to do them all, but to your point, it's every part of your value chain, and there's your to-do list. So lots of free resources out there. So that's good advice. How about this? I will ask you, what are you guys going into then the next 20 years of your organization, of your company? What are the challenges that you see out ahead, or what things do you still want to do or hope to do, or how do you hope the landscape changes? But is there anything that's more challenging than ever right now?
More challenging than ever. He said there's a guy mowing my lawn outside the front door.
Yeah.
More challenging than ever. I think for me is the lack of people that have an understanding of our space for us to hire. That's me personally and for our own business. And
I want to stop you there real quick. What do you mean by that? What does that mean? Understanding of that space?
That there's, so for people that want to get a job, well, we can make that conversation, but there's not enough people that have an overview and an understanding of how it all fits together, the ESG sustainability at large.
Yeah.
That I can hire to work at thinkPARALLAX.
Got it.
They don't. They might have worked at an ad agency or a creative agency before. They might have been a project manager, and maybe they've worked in sustainability to some degree, but that's very hard to find.
Yeah.
So what our big piece has been, I think, for the last 2 years is really, and we have 30 employees and probably 30 contractors. 15 of them were just training to kind of give them like a learning and knowledge and understanding of just the space at large.
And I would imagine that some of the people might have the E experience, maybe people that have the S experience, and then for sure people on the G side. But to your point, trying to find somebody who's like, hey, I can connect all this. I know the language in all those spaces. Tough, right?
Very difficult. And then what I've done in the past is we've hired people that have like agency, project management, marketing experience, but there's a very steep learning curve, which I'm realizing could be a couple of years before they actually have a really good understanding of the space, what's happening, how to talk about it, and how to write about it. So for me, that's probably has been one of my biggest issues. It's been very difficult to hire the right people. We have a great team, fantastic people, but to get up to speed with how quickly the space is evolving, and also our services keep evolving very quickly. I mean, it's like you're in college and you're just having to learn. And because again, if we go back 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, what we were talking about, how we talked about it wasn't exactly the same thing. And so the people that work here need to keep evolving, and people that we hire need to be pretty evolved, or they need to really quickly ramp up the space. So for me, that's personally one of the big gaps that we find in terms of kind of growing our business. And the other one that I can foresee for the future for us and for our business, which is separate to the space, is that I think a lot of things will become digital, data, and automated, as is the whole world. So if you take the reporting piece, like we produce these reports, a lot of times they're just a PDF report. Sometimes we've made a website, and sometimes there's software that exists out there that I believe in the future, the software will just be, for a lot of it, connected to sources that plug in the information that are related to all the different topics that were part of your strategy. And so it'll be like real-time data. And I had believe it or not, I had a few meetings with a woman, her name is Jean Rogers, who created SASB. I somehow got myself into a meeting in San Francisco like 4 or 5 years ago. And then we started brainstorming, and then we're talking, and she's kind of like one of those creative genius types. She's kind of like off in left field. And she was like, oh, well, reporting is just like, it's dead. Like, as soon as the report comes out, it's like dead. Like not useless, it's just like old information. And then in my head, I'm like, well, damn, you're the person that created SASB.
Yeah.
Like this is like part of your doing. But what her conversation was, it evolved to that, was that everything that we see and we know in some way in the future will be collected to data that comes from sources. So I can't try to make up how that looks like for the supply chain for apparel, but maybe everything related to all those different steps you mentioned is somehow measured. It's digital and it's all connected. So when it's not reported, it's just being displayed of what's actually happening, which I know I can't exactly wrap my head around that, but I can kind of wrap my head around it because I can see how it's possible.
It's it's the blockchain idea, essentially, right? Some form of it, some extended form of that, where it's just automatically being uploaded, ledgered, can't use traceable. It's like once it's up there, it's true, kind of thing.
Like your, I have never actually checked, but I'm assuming that you can check right now to see what your meter's doing for your house.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, so if you just think if everything else is captured and then it's just like real-time data, the reporting work we do goes away, but I can't even begin to wrap my head around how many other functions in and around sustainability will become automated, which I would guess is a lot, which is probably for the better. So this business, that what we do means we need to keep evolving. So we've thought,
interesting.
Like, okay, for the reporting, we need to be involved in the strategy of helping people figure out what needs to be in the report, maybe producing some of the content and monitoring it. But maybe we're not actually producing reports in the future like we are now, because maybe it will be a thing of the past.
Because it almost generates the report itself. Like there's a dashboard.
Dashboard, yep.
Yeah,
something
interesting. Interesting.
I mean, again, we're talking like 10 years from now, but I mean, like 10 years ago, there's things that we couldn't have imagined were like real time now. So it kind of makes sense, right?
10 years ago, we weren't talking about climate the way we are. A lot of people were, but
not many.
So not many. Okay, that's cool. So finding the right people, dealing with automation and the new technologies, and making sure that you're keeping up with the new form of reporting, whatever that might be. What advice do you have, Jonathan, for, I think maybe you just kind of said it, but for brands and companies that are, early on in their stage and they're trying to dip their toe, they're worried about all of this oncoming legislation, pressure, regulations, etc. Or for people that want to get into this space that are like, I so badly want to be in sustainability. A lot of people get stuck. Like, I don't know what to take in college. How do I even get into that role? Where do I start? So advice and thoughts to companies and into individuals.
Yeah, I definitely have some ideas. I think for the people part, for the career, it's probably my favorite thing actually, is to help people somehow figure out their career path. And what I would do if it was me and I didn't take any classes, or I was like post kind of college, is I would probably, for starters, subscribe to something like GreenBiz. Like GreenBiz has like a monthly or a weekly newsletter, multiple newsletters. It's just indoctrinating myself in all the language, the happenings, what's going on, listening to the webinars, just really get ingrained with what's happening and make it like a steady, every week I'm reading for 3 hours in and around what's happening.
Immerse yourself in it.
Immerse yourself. That's the right word. Not indoctrinate, immerse. And then I would figure out, okay, how do I get part of the right network? So I would find either in my local area, if there was like a B Corp or anything related to something with business for good, or an upcoming conference, sustainable brands or GreenBiz, you can volunteer out and it's very low cost. I would for sure get involved with a network. And then I would probably take one more step if possible. I would, just to get my footing a little more, you could get yourself a certificate like with SASB or GRI. That's a reporting certificate. So if someone like me wants to go hire someone, and I see, even if it's like for an intern, and they say, oh, I have a SASB certification. Well, I know, at the very least, they've gone through, they understand kind of how all different industries have all different issues, and all different industries and companies then need to address those issues through a strategy and report on it. And they have like a general foundational understanding, and it's like a pretty legitimate certification, as in like everybody would know, okay, I feel confident that person knows something that gets them past everybody else. And I don't know what it costs these days, $1,000. It's not very expensive. I don't think it might take you like 6 or 8 weeks, but I think if I was trying to dive into our space, those things, get the certification, it's not that hard, begin networking, and then like immerse yourself with whatever stuff you can find. And GreenBiz or sustainable brands, but GreenBiz, Ethical Corp, Routers, they all pump out a bunch of content that's like get you understanding, and start to be active on LinkedIn and like kind of
definitely
understand where you're going to find your niche. And I think with that, the whole niche thing is like learning more and more and more of what you're interested in, because I really do believe that like being an expert in one particular area, it might take a few years, but in the end, it's going to be a win in terms of like your growth, like who you are, your personal development, and then probably monetarily, like you're going to end up making more money in the end. It might take you a while to become the expert. I'm actually kind of friends with Joel, the guy from GreenBiz. Like he just was like, and other people I know, they're just passionate about it. And he's a fabulous writer, and he had all these kind of side businesses, and he's just like producing the content, and it kept evolving, and that he just leaned into what he was really good at and he was passionate about. And now it's like a really big, successful organization. So I think the same thing with everything related to ES and G, especially the environmental piece, is going to continue to evolve. Unfortunately, if everything was going great on Earth, we wouldn't be having this conversation in the same way. But I think if you were really into the technology, if you're really into something with solar or something with supply chain transparency, just get more into what you're interested in, and eventually it will lend itself to like a really interesting career. That's on the personal path.
Yeah, good advice.
And then your question around the brand, like if they were going to jump in, I think I would do that. I would start off before I started a company, or if I was, like a beginning company in early stages, I would do that assessment, just take it on myself to do some sort of SWOT analysis of looking at like a benchmark of what were the issues facing my industry. And then what could I kind of like have a fun session on what could be a potential future issue. And maybe with one of the ones you need to focus on for your strategy, it becomes the kind of the mantra of like, this is how we're going to differentiate ourselves. So if it was, for example, the apparel industry, and you mentioned about 19 steps, but if somewhere in the first 5 steps was like, we're going to really change what it looks like on the dyeing, I don't even know what you said, like the yarn development from the cotton to the thread to the, like, we're going to revolutionize that because we understand how it works really well.
And that's where the biggest impacts are anyway. So great place to start.
That was a good guess.
Yeah.
then you would just really lean into that. So you need to address these issues because you can look at the strategy, that document on SASB, but then really figure out like we're really most passionate about it, or it's the people. We've created a work culture where we've done X, Y, or Z, or hey, we put these measures in place around how we govern ourselves. I think that leaning into one of them could be like a brand positioning kind of exercise, which would then tie into the strategy, which I think is the smartest thing of all.
Yeah. That's both of those are really good. And on that, I have one other question that I want to layer in there. Do you see from the companies that you work with, what works best? A team that has a dedicated sustainability expert, a CSO, a head of sustainability, a team that has a CEO that is very passionate about this, driving this from the top, or a team that is sort of where it's more integrated and everybody is sort of playing a role, chipping in, pushing towards this. Maybe it's a little bit of both. What do you see most, and what do you think is most effective? Do companies put one person in charge, or is it just like, no, worry about baking this into the whole organization?
We always have someone in charge.
Yeah.
So I think we're not really working with companies that are smaller than maybe $1 billion or 500 million. They're all pretty big.
And how big are their sustainability teams usually? They're
between one at the smallest. Like there's a couple of startups I've spoken to that they're small, like 50. There's a few that are say 50 or 100 million or 150 million, and it's like half a marketing person's role, half sustainability. Sometimes it's some investor relations, a little bit ESG, but maybe more marketing communications, which doesn't really make sense in my mind in some ways. But all the way up to, we've seen 8 or 10 people, a big team, like a full. One of our employees is working with the
pharmaceuticals,
the pharma company on the report, and he said that there was 200 people that were involved in the reporting process.
Jeez.
And
wow.
They're not all working on it. They're not employees, but they all have some sort of
have a role to play.
And say in probably mostly providing the content, or they're like subject matter experts. But anyways, typically with a bigger team, we see like 4 to 8 people, which is kind of a lot. Normally it'd be like 2 or 3. And the best case scenario always is that the CEO is bought in. And as soon as that happens, it makes everyone's job easier, because what happens is we're working with a company, and then we make recommendations, say, we really think you need to be doing this. And like, we don't have the money, but it's really important for these different reasons. They don't buy into it because they can't get the money. But if the CEO says, okay, I understand why it's it's essential for the viability of the company, and it's the right thing to do. It's like a win-win-win. Then they get the money.
Yep.
And if they don't, it's not going to happen. So.
And I see that a lot with companies that I work with, where you get them fired up, you give them all the resources, and they get excited, and they go to do things, and they hit this ceiling. And I'll get notes from them like, "Hey, what do we do now? We're stuck. We can't. We're either not allowed. We're not getting resources. We're getting too much pressure on everything else." And that can be really frustrating from the team. So yeah, having it come from the top is so important. Jonathan, the last thing I want to ask you here as we turn the corner here and try to wrap this up for you so you can get back to running your company. What do you want? You mentioned earlier that you really want people to understand things better. What is it though? I guess what would be your last kind of parting thoughts on what do you want people to understand about ESG, sustainability, corporate responsibility, B Corps, whatever, all this whole space that you've been kind of immersed in for so many years now? You're working with so many great organizations and brands. Just, I guess, in general to the public, people that may or may not know, but what do you want people to understand about all of this? Whether it's why you're doing it, why it's important, open-ended again, but what do you want them taking away from all of this or the work that you do?
I think my biggest takeaway for anyone that runs any kind of organization is like, it's not just the right thing to do. I guess it's the right thing to do in all the ways. And I don't have like a spiel or a script to answer this.
Yeah.
And like succinctly in any way, shape, or form. But I think I've seen it over all the years of it's the right thing to do for the employees. It's the right thing to do for the environment. It's the right thing to do for the communities. And in the end, it's going to be the right thing to do for more profit. And I think when people can wrap their heads around that it's really so interconnected, then I guess I'd be happy. A world like we've talked about evolving our mission or our purpose, like a world where every company is sustainable. It's like if everyone that owned every organization in the whole world thought like that, then everything would be very different. So I think that there's been a lot of investor pressure the last few years that made some changes. Great. But I think it's just more companies proving that they can be successful by doing things, we'll call them the right way. It's just going to be the proof to convince other companies to do it. So I think my biggest takeaway in the greater scheme of the world would be just that. It's just like the right way to do it is actually the right way for all the ways.
That's pretty good. And that might be your script right there. You can take that as your script. I'll record it and give it to you. Yeah, it's your spiel.
Okay.
Well, Jonathan, thank you. Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. And what we're going to do is I'm going to call you back in 5 years. Well, beforehand, I'm going to call you back because I want to see if I can help you train your team and maybe take a load off as well. So we'll see if there's an option there. But I'm going to hit you up in 5 years because we're going to follow up to see where things stand then.
Absolutely. I hope I see you before then.
I agree.
Thank you for the opportunity. This is really fun. We could talk about it forever. I could see how it could just go on and on in a nice way.
Agree. And there is so much. And you're so well versed in this space. It is worth. I definitely may hit you up just to have a follow up conversation, because I think people need insights into this, and that's what I want to do is make this try to break down some of the mystique and some of these words of advice that you have. I think are so good, and I just want more and more people outside of the professional space who do this every day to have access to that knowledge and those insights. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. Enjoy the long weekend. Enjoy the sunshine, and I'll talk to you soon.
Cool. Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Hey, thanks for listening. This is a show produced by The Underswell and our School of Understanding. If you're interested in being a part of this movement and want to dive deeper into the art of understanding sustainability better so that you can do things better, be sure to visit us at theunderswell.com. We offer structured, easy-to-follow workshops, courses, and member resources to make sustainability a part of your career or lifestyle. Because remember, no matter what role you play a role, and we're here for you. Thanks again.